Hi everyone. So, speaking your truth is a theme that has become a global phenomenon in the last while, and it's been an internal struggle for me to come to the decision today to do just that. I've made a conscious decision to publicly speak my truth in detail for the first time. And the reason I'm doing this here on my very own platform is because I've been asked numerous times to tell my story on TV and radio and other platforms, but I feel that you, my followers and supporters, should know my story first. So I'm apologizing in advance for the snot and trana that you might witness, but I've vowed not to do a take two on this one. So here I am without cameras, studio lights, and all the fancy stuff that glosses over imperfections. Here I am, plain old me, sharing my life with the people that support us and our cause with so much love and devotion. I'm hoping that this will explain why woman empowerment is the fundamental element of everything that I do in my life and in my career. So here it goes. Almost 25 years ago, on my 15th birthday, I was at a friend's house. Her father and four of his friends raped me. I was only in grade 10 and was terrified to tell my parents. So I only told one person about it. He was my best friend, Sanjay Singh, and actually he is still a very dear friend of mine. I didn't want to tell anyone, but unfortunately, a week later, I had some serious medical complications from that traumatic experience, and I realized that I had to speak to a doctor. It so happened that the chairperson of my religious organization was a doctor, so I approached him for help. From the outset, he encouraged me to tell my parents because he saw the struggle I was going through, but I swore him to secrecy and threatened that I would kill myself if if he had to tell anybody about it. He noticed that during that year I was becoming increasingly rebellious and withdrawn. So my mom and I would fight all the time. I began bunking school and became an extremely aggressive and stubborn teenager. In that year, I was already a 10th year dedicated student in classical dance and was close to graduation, but I refused to go back to that dance school. I felt like everyone was watching me. I felt disgusted, like I didn't belong with those sweet, innocent girls that I knew from the age of 5. I found a different dance institution, and meanwhile, at my academic school, I went from being an above average performer to failing grade 10. As the next year approached, my closest friend and companion Sanjay moved over to grade 11 while I was stuck in grade 10. But I did not want to further disappoint my parents, so I went back to school, even more ashamed and depressed than before. It was then that I met a new close friend, again, a woman that still holds a special place in my life and in my heart. She introduced me to her boyfriend's friend. He was almost 7 years older than me. A few weeks later, he became my first boyfriend. I only realized years later that I had been drawn to Dinesh because he had a reputation for being a gangster and he carried a gun. So I felt that he would be able to protect me. I was in deep paranoia and was intensely afraid that my rapist would come after me. Even though I trusted my doctor and Sanjay, I was convinced that somehow they found out that I told on them and they would come after me. My mom found out about my relationship with Dinesh and utterly disapproved. She made her dissatisfaction precisely clear, but I continued dating him. To be quite honest, I don't remember much of my relationship with him, quite possibly due to repressing much of it. He constantly threatened to shoot me and on multiple occasions threatened my family too. I do remember those incidents quite distinctly. Even though I went back to school because I wanted to feel like I was worth something, I continued to bunk school. I began hanging around with the wrong company and caved to peer pressure. I began smoking, drinking, and hanging out with thugs and drug addicts. There was one thing in my life that was positive though. Luckily, I had my dancing. Now, classical Indian dance is not only a form of entertainment, it's a spiritual dedication to God. And I simply could never give it up, especially because my grandmother lived with us. She was a respected public figure, a vernacular educator, and a very revered community member. I was one of the youngest grandchildren amongst a brood of 24, and my granny and I shared a very, very close relationship. I was the only grandchild that she enrolled in dance school, and so I refused to dishonor her death by quitting. I continued my dance career in both Kathak and Bharatanatyam under a new tutor and eventually completed my diploma. This achievement I also attribute to my parents, as they devoted much of their time and efforts to help me see it through. In March of that year, after I had turned 16, I bunked school to go to a hangout spot in Lenasia, a place called Greyville. As luck would have it, this was the day the police chose to raid the home of the thug we were visiting. We were all escorted to jail. There I was allowed to make a call, and so I called my doctor, and he and the late Sergeant Paul advised that I come from a prominent, respectable family and that I should speak to my parents about what happened to me to trigger my rebellious behavior. Honestly, I was panic-stricken that I would end up in jail, so I agreed to do so under the condition that they would be with me. That night, the two of them came over to my house, and together we spoke to my parents. Despite the fact that my father and I had always shared a strong bond, I felt that connection slowly slipping away from that night. And again, I don't have much memory of the next 3 years other than overwhelming feelings of fear and confusion. I still refused to break up with Dinesh, and I'm assuming due to my public facade of a bubbly nature, my parents did not send me for counseling like my doctor suggested. Also, bear in mind, Indian people back then did not believe in mental health facilitation, and for me, my mental health continued to deteriorate, and again, I failed grade 11. Luckily, the principal condoned my pass to matric. My relationship with my mom went from bad to worse, and we fought daily. I remember with clarity that I attempted suicide a few times, and my mom had to literally save my life. One day she found me after overdosing, and another day I had cut my wrists so badly that a very popular doctor in Lenasia, Dr. Natha, told her that had my mom not rushed me to her, I would have died. The third time I tried strangling myself with a power cable. All this time I was in a mentally and emotionally abusive relationship with daily threats and manipulations so intense I can't even bear to even think about how many times Dinesh pulled out his gun and put it to my head, threatening to kill me and my family if I've ever left him. One day in my matric year, if memory serves me correctly, I was writing prelim exams. It was a Saturday morning, and I asked my parents if I could walk to the library. In all that mental mess that I was in, I loved the library in Lenasia Extension 3, and I was walking to the library. Unfortunately, some men got a hold of me, and I think they tried to kill me. But later that day, I was found unconscious, far from home, and when my parents picked me up from the people who had rescued me, they rushed me to hospital, and there the doctors confirmed that I had not been sexually assaulted, but I had been injected with some kind of a drug, and my throat was cut. I was drenched in blood. I was disoriented and very afraid. So my father called one of his cousins, who at the time was a well-known high school principal in Lenasia South, and he convinced my father to allow Dinesh to have house permission for me to feel safer in order to complete my final exams. I was 18 already, so my father agreed. In an effort to try and improve my relationship with Dinesh, my family tried to step in and offer him support. In their frame of reference, if they could show him love and compassion, it could change his mentality and maybe sway him away from his traumatic past and maybe his destructive behavior. They tried so hard to make him feel loved, realizing that he was also a broken and mentally disturbed person, a man without stability and a proper family of his own. To his credit, Dinesh did convince me to complete my matric. And so he walked me to and from school every single day until I wrote my last paper. After that last incident, I became convinced that my rapists were watching me, and so I spiraled into depression. My parents tried to support mine and Dinesh's relationship however they could. After my last paper, I had convinced my mom that I was going to fail matric. Seemed inevitable. So she sent me to her sister's house in Durban, early December, I think, and just to get away and spend some time with my cousins, of whom I shared an extremely close relationship with in my growing up years. Dinesh accompanied me, but he stayed with his family, and that caused problems as he didn't trust my cousins. He was concerned that we would go clubbing with them, which never happened, but he seemed quite paranoid about it. I remember the one day he took me to the beach. He pulled out his gun and fired shots into the air and warned me that he would have no issue killing me and himself if I did anything he didn't approve of. The time away from home was truly anything but relaxing. We returned home just before Christmas, and on the 28th of December, the night that I would receive my matric results, my dad went to bed early and my mom was busy around the house. Dinesh and I were hanging out. His cutoff time for going home was 8 p.m. But since it was the festive season and my mom, was in a good mood, I guess, she had agreed that he could stay a bit later. We were not allowed to be behind closed doors, so we sat outside. For some odd reason, Dinesh told my mom that since my dad was sleeping, he would accompany us or drive us to the petrol station once we received word that the newspapers with our matric results were out. I didn't dare to argue with him and just went along with what he was saying, knowing I was going to be even more embarrassed and depressed watching my friends celebrate their positive results whilst I see my failed or not see my name in the newspaper. It was time. Dinesh went into the shop and he got a newspaper, searched for my name and found it. A key component to the beginning of my career, my future, was written there in black and white. I had passed matric. I felt that it was a miracle, considering the trauma I had experienced, that I had struggled to study and that I hadn't attended school for more than half the expected time. I felt immense relief and maybe even a sense of freedom. We returned home, and since I am and always was a bit of a prankster, I went into my father's room where he was sleeping and started crying. His response is something I would never, ever forget. He said, "Yudeshni, why are you crying? You know we are here to support you. It doesn't matter if you failed." I responded, "Daddy, I passed." He jumped out of bed in only his briefs, grabbed the newspaper and laid it underneath the chandelier on the dining room table. And he then opened the small bottle of champagne he had been gifted at his annual Christmas party just weeks earlier, and he thanked Dinesh for supporting me. He suggested that we go for a drive. We headed out to Gold Reef City Casino and then drove to spend the day at Warm Baths. I mentioned this specifically because it's one of the very few days that I remember being filled with smiles and joy until I reached the age of 36. Yes, even the day I got married and gave birth to my kids were days filled with loneliness, pain, and tears. The following year, on the 8th of February, I turned 19 and started my first day in the big world of employment, where I found that I would face even more sexual harassment and abuse and would have to deal with discrimination for my ethnicity. But in the meantime, my dad had found permanent employment for Dinesh, and the three of us traveled together to work in my dad's car. I also started applying to go abroad to work on a cruise ship and hopefully enroll for a tertiary course in journalism. Writing and public speaking were a passion of mine since I could write and talk. Dinesh was very supportive of me going away, and he would take the time to help me search and apply for opportunities. Well, at least initially he would do that. As time went on, he became more and more jealous and possessive. And in May that year, his misbehavior at work escalated to the point where he was openly abusing his position, and my father had become increasingly frustrated with him. At the same time, his ill treatment of me became worse than ever before. I agonized over breaking up with him for a while and was feeling a very real sense of fear and confusion. My depression got worse. I withdrew from everyone and everything around me. We broke up on the 23rd of May that year. He continued pursuing me, and perhaps I did love him out of obligation for passing matric. So I spoke to my dad to allow him to come back home and just give us another chance. My dad said I should ask him to come back on the 6th of July for a meeting. I think his idea was that if he agreed, or Dinesh agreed to certain terms and conditions, my father would allow him back into our lives. So I called him on the 22nd of June, which was also Dinesh's birthday, and told him that he should meet with my dad. Truthfully, I really cannot report on my mental state of mind. As I said earlier on, much of my life at that stage is a blur. Although the 30th of June will stand out in my mind forever. It was the World Cup soccer finals with Germany and Brazil, and since my father is a soccer fanatic and I think he was fully in support of Germany that year, where his brother actually immigrated to for more than 50 years, or 50 years ago. There was a lot of excitement in the air. At the same time, I was aware that Dinesh was wearing his Brazil t-shirt and was heading out to watch the match with friends. Now, please bear in mind that we had no smartphones at the time, but there is a reason why I remember him wearing that Brazil t-shirt. Brazil won, and Dinesh got violently drunk. He phoned me, it was 8 p.m. on a Sunday night, and said he was on his way to my house. I asked him not to come because it was already very late, and that he would need to meet with my dad before just showing up at my house. I had a very, very bad feeling about it and felt anxiety growing in the pit of my stomach. He asserted that he didn't care and he needed to see me. I clearly remember his words. It's now or never. So I told my mom and suggested that I talk to him out in the driveway. She panicked and instructed that I was not to leave the yard. It was in the dead midst of winter. It was a dark, very dark, gloomy night. Dinesh arrived. He greeted me, handed me a ring that I had bought for him, and told me that he loved me. He then pulled out his gun. He aimed it at me, and he fired one shot. I remember instantly falling to the ground. In that split second, I realized that it was just the impact of the gunshot and bullet that literally missed me by mere inches. I really thought that I had been shot. And as I watched in shock through the panels in the gate, he turned the gun around, placed the barrel on his head, and he pulled the trigger. My doctor, my neighbors, family, and we watched him bleed over the next hour while we waited for a helicopter to arrive. He never made it to the hospital. Subsequent to his death, his friends and some of his family members threatened to kill us. And initially I was also accused of killing him, as he used his right hand to shoot himself, and it was thought that he was left-handed. I knew he was ambidextrous, but police anyhow tested for gunpowder residue and found more evidence that supported the fact that he was in fact equally proficient with both of his hands. Was it not for a tattoo of my name on his left hand, which he had done himself using his right hand, I quite possibly may have landed up in jail. As though I hadn't yet experienced, or my family hadn't yet experienced enough trauma, I was told that I would not be allowed to attend his funeral. One of my cousins and my parents had a meeting with his family and pleaded my case to attend. If not for the respect of our 3-year relationship, then foreclosure for my family, because despite his difficult nature and a volatile relationship with me, he had become extremely close to some of my family members, and especially my mom. His death rocked her to her core. To this day, it's a reminder that we cannot forget the good people do just because the bad outweighs the good. And truthfully, Dinesh wasn't a good partner to me, but he had good qualities and he did ensure I completed my schooling. He was also incredibly damaged himself. A few years later, his brother Anesh, to whom he was the closest in the world, to also committed suicide. And so too did his friend that introduced us to each other, leaving my friend a widow with 2 small children. The months and years after Dinesh's death are a blur. I attempted suicide a few more times, unable to deal with the tidal wave of emotions and pain. I remember one day walking from my office to my dad's place of work in Boysons and literally stopping in the middle of a busy road as a bus came hurtling towards me, but the bus stopped on time. I realized in retrospect that it was crucial at the time for me to receive counseling, but it just wasn't happening, which is another reason why the next 17 years of my life would be lived in pain, suffering, and insecurity. It was the 28th of September, and I remember that a popular musician in Lenasia had contacted me to perform at a gig weeks earlier. Initially, I refused, but my mom had persuaded me to do it. I think she knew how healing dance was for me. I was so upset that morning because I did not practice, I did not rehearse. I literally only started rehearsing to perform 7 dances for that day, crying all the while that morning. I remember that I was crying and practicing, and I saw a bird in my lounge. I'm not sure how it got there, but it was stuck and I freaked out. I asked my dad to please take the bird away, but before he did, I spoke to the bird. Tears streaming down my face, I pleaded with the bird to save my life and send someone to me that would help to carry my costumes to this gig. I was devastated, wondering who would do this for me now that Dinesh was gone. He had attended all my gigs for the past 3 years, and with his protection, I had felt safe and confident to dance in public. Well, that night, in the audience sat an angel, my future husband. Gosh, a man who was never really fond of Indian music and dance concerts, and most likely never attended any in his life. Well, that night he was forced to attend that concert by the very same musician that had asked me to dance. I never met Akash that night, but I do believe that that little birdie had a part in sealing our fate. I remember that our mutual friend put us in contact with each other, and our friendship began. Akash would phone me every night for the next 2 months, and all I would ever talk about for hours on end was Dinesh. Akash lived in Santon, I lived in Malaysia. That's almost 50 minutes apart, and it was impossible for us at that stage to actually meet up. Eventually, after some time had passed, we were able to meet, and our connection as friends was instant. He would listen to my dramas and life stories and advise me, comfort me, and just be there. His patience and quiet understanding was so healing to me. Whilst this was going on, the physical backlash of the shooting was catching up to me. I would wake up in the middle of the night, rocked by nightmares. Sometimes I'd sleepwalk, dreaming that Dinesh was calling me to the driveway. His silhouette and bloodstains would keep resurfacing along the driveway. Eventually, my dad called a distant cousin of mine who was a well-known priest in Indonesia and asked him to perform a prayer ritual, but nothing worked. I believed then, and I believe now, that Dinesh's soul was roaming around, maybe even calling me to join him. Eventually, I could no longer live there. A year later, I landed a job in Santon, and I begged my father to allow me to leave Indonesia. I assured him that Akash would be there for me, and while he was hesitant, my dad gave me his full support and blessing. Take note that 20 years ago, this was unheard of. It was taboo for an Indian girl to move out of her parents' home unless she was getting married. I guess my circumstances were unique. I didn't have a license, a car, or very much money, and I had even less faith or confidence. I had my clothes, a single bed, and I had my best friend. I had Akash. So I moved into a garden flat, which was actually just a small bedroom with a 2-plate stove and a tiny shower. My parents came to check it out, and they gave me their blessings. And this marked the beginning of the second half of my life, with still more trauma to come. I then started work in Ravonia on the 1st of July 2003, and after a week, my bosses, 2 men, felt I was more suited to being their plaything. So they harassed me and made me feel like I had no other value than to serve them. So I quit my job immediately, but not before I threatened to lay a charge against them if they didn't pay me my salary for the next 3 months. I knew that if I had to go back to Indonesia, it would have been the end of me, and I needed to find another job. So when they paid me out, in fear of the legal repercussions, I guess, I paid my rent up front for 3 months. I searched for other employment, and during this time, Akash and I decided to move in together to save on rent. I called my dad, and despite his outspoken disapproval, he conceded. I think it was out of fear of my fragile mental state. Akash, on the other hand, called his mom and promised that if she would give her blessings, he would marry me. And here we are, 20 years later, married with 2 children. But wait, I'm jumping far ahead. Dinesh and his death continued to haunt me. And Akash and I would go to Dinesh's favorite spot at the river year after year for 5 to 6 years on the anniversary of his death to perform Hindu rituals for his soul to rest in peace. Nothing worked to clear the feeling of being haunted. The rape also continued to torture me, and despite all of this, when I was 21 years old, I decided to please our parents and Akash, of course, and agreed to marry Akash. It's crucial for me to mention the unwavering and incredible support of Akash's parents. They stood by my side since the age of 20, knowing my past. So to fulfill their wishes was always and is a priority for me, always. We had a huge, lavish wedding with more than 500 guests in Durban. My uncle traveled from Germany, and my dad's sister traveled all the way from Canada. More than 50 of my family members came from Johannesburg to KZN. And all this while, I only did this to make my parents proud and to thank Akash for being such a wonderful pillar of strength to me. I thought that maybe, just maybe, I could lead a normal life. Akash bought our first house that year, and I really felt that I would eventually live happily ever after. I was so wrong. As expected from a married woman, I simply fell pregnant at 22, all the while just going through the motions. I say this because it's very important to understand the repercussions or after effects of not receiving counseling after rape. But sex was a major issue for me, as I hadn't dealt with the trauma of my own sexual assault. This lingered for almost 2 decades. I couldn't and still don't share a bedroom with my husband. The triggers and uncomfortable feeling of someone sleeping next to me became a major issue in our marriage. Akash's love and affection for me continued to grow, and he showed that he would do anything and everything to make me feel better and to be happy. He even built a room inside our main bedroom that is almost soundproof for me to be able to sleep at night. So it was that at the age of 22, I started my own dance school, which I ran successfully for 10 years. Dance saved my soul in many ways, but I always felt like I wanted more. I wanted to own and run my own newspaper, and I wanted to be an investigative journalist. I had one vision in mind at the time, which was to use my publication to draw attention to gender-based violence, raise awareness about suicide, and talk about the horrors and after effects of sexual assault, especially in the absence of counseling. So I became the first Indian woman to own a tabloid newspaper. I pushed all the boundaries to make it work, and eventually had a successful publication called the Midrand Advertiser. I ran this monthly publication for many years until print started to transition to digital, and sadly I had to close it down. Between the ages of 22 and 32, so much went wrong in our lives. Akash and I sold our house. We moved 9 times and saw the relationship between myself and my parents deteriorate. There was a period of 5 years in total where we just didn't even talk to each other, and instead we would fight because I felt that they just didn't understand me, and maybe deep down I blamed them for not helping me deal with the trauma. What I didn't realize was how I was affected, and how every aspect of my life was negatively impacted by the traumas I had experienced, and never seeking professional help for it. All my relationships suffered as a result. Unfortunately, along the way, I've lost many family members, many friends, many family members that did not identify the pain that I was going through. My mom and I would fight with each other almost every time we spoke on the phone. And the only thing that kept me hoping and praying for peace, the only thing that put a smile on my face, was raising my two children, the ability to dance, my journalistic career that I loved so much, and my eternal gratitude to Akash for trying to give me a second chance at life. Akash invested all his money in ensuring that I was suitably educated and successful, and he sacrificed his last cent to accommodate my wild dreams and ambitions. But eventually, this had to stop as well because reason had to prevail. I think I constantly just wanted acknowledgement. I wanted approval from the people that meant the world to me. In my 26th year, my daughter Ria was born. She became the center of my world. Today, she is a 13-year-old, and she's truly my best friend. And something magical came from the birth of my daughter. It changed the relationship between my mom and I. It made me realize that I wanted more. And so I turned over a new leaf with my parents, but especially my mom. From that year, the two of us grew closer than ever. And while we still don't have the conventional mother-daughter relationship, we do enjoy the time that we spend together. So today I appreciate and I respect and I love that strong cancer survivor and courageous, hilarious woman like no other. She is the most funniest, kindest human being, and I'm so proud of her. And I like to believe that she's proud of me too. My father always was and still is a man of very few words. The previous generation of Indian parents did not express love in a vocal manner, but at my 30th birthday, my dad said 3 words that meant the world to me. He said, "She is a fighter." You see, I was born with a narrow windpipe, a condition called larynca malacia, that, according to my mom, almost cost me my life a few times before I turned a year old. I constantly suffer from breathing issues because of my windpipes being narrow. She tells the story that no one thought I would survive, and that she would feed me and the milk would simply come out of my nose while I choked. For an entire year, she would sleep with my hand in hers to ensure I was still alive. She sacrificed her own job to stay at home with me. My grandmother also played an integral role in my life, instilling values like dedication, devotion, and integrity in everything that I do. I slept in her bed for the first 11 years of my life until she passed away, which was the first traumatic event I actually can remember. I mention these things only because I do believe that everything that happened in my life, especially the people that I encountered, contributed to my present moment. In 2010, while my publication was still struggling to survive, I knew that I needed to work, and so I landed my first real job in the motoring industry. It was at a premium brand where I began writing car-related articles, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I then moved to another OEM and was asked to write an article for the launch of uh, the Zambian dealership, which proved to be a huge success. I worked for for more OEMs after that, and then decided that I would freelance rather. So I was facing major hurdles in the form of discrimination in an industry that was male dominated. And trust me, my ethnicity didn't help at all. Little did I know that this was going to be a brand new and long road to liberation for me. On more than one occasion, I was told to quit trying to get vehicles from the media fleet, from the OEMs, and I was called derogatory names for wanting to test drive premium brand vehicles. I then took on full employment with a popular aggregator where I would still face gender discrimination and abuse due to the extent that I suffered a cardiac arrhythmic attack in 2018. The incident happened at one of my dealerships and I was working at, and the dealer principal actually would later retire and become my business partner. With all my challenges and only a few OEMs on my side, I would go to dealerships and ask them to allow me to drive the vehicles from the showroom and then write my articles. This became a successful media marketing product for the aggregator I was working for, but I soon realized that the company was abusing my services. So I decided to launch my own motoring magazine, and I became the first qualified female motoring journalist in South Africa to own an online motoring magazine as well. So a few months later, I became the journalist to crank out the most car reviews in 1 month. And so I wanted to thank my dealer principals and colleagues through an event that would give them recognition. I naively and faithfully approached one of the biggest financial institutions in South Africa to support my Motoring Woman of the Year Awards program. They loved the concept and immediately agreed. It was only supposed to be a once-off program until one of the founders of MFC, the late Doe Ledley, and his team encouraged me to continue the program as nominations began streaming in countrywide ages in advance. So next year we will be celebrating the 1st anniversary of this program. In the meantime, my business partner and I were turning the corner in becoming a popular aggregator with almost 22,000 cars listed on our site. Sadly, COVID-19 hit, and Andre and I fought to survive the blow to our business. Tragically, whilst we were fighting, he passed away due to the virus. I was left with an almost sinking ship. In the meantime, I worked on reverting my aggregator back to a motoring magazine because the platform was receiving more than 1 million visitors per month. I was also working hard at growing the Talk digital show, which I started in 2020 to offer a platform for women who were participating in the awards program. This became the first motoring digital talk show to be hosted by a woman in the country, maybe even in the world. Due to a loss of income, the financial institution offered me a job to head up editorial on their groundbreaking new project, an app, and a website, a portal, which I'm extremely, extremely proud to be a part of. Meanwhile, in my personal capacity, transformation was also taking place at the age of 36, the very same year that the last of my rapists died. Please bear in mind, I was 15. They were over the age of 50 at the time. And yeah, one of South Africa's biggest car manufacturers contacted me to join Miss South Africa in Philippolis that year. Philippolis is one of the poorest towns in South Africa. The expectation was that if I would align myself with the RADA organization, which stands for Rape, Alcohol, Drug and Abuse, it would be great for exposure for them as well. It was there that I found the courage for the first time to publicly speak about my own experience. It was baby steps for me, but I began to seek counseling, and here again, I gained strength little by little to share with more and more people. This year, not only am I using my platforms to empower women in motoring, many of whom are also survivors of abuse, not only in the workspace but in their personal life. But I'm also traveling the country educating young girls about opportunities that lie ahead for them in our trade. I use this platform to talk about rape, GBV, and suicide. And remember, I talked about my dream at the age of 22 to use my platform to raise awareness. 18 years later, it has manifested into a reality. This year will be the 20th anniversary of mine and Akash's life coming together. It's important for me to say that I have finally healed and given myself to him. And joyously, in April this year, I was approached by a reputable production company to create a movie about my life. So I plucked up the courage, went to my parents, and asked them to be a part of my story. While they hesitated, not only due to society pressure, but they're also quite old, my mom and dad agreed. And this liberated me, mind, heart, body, and soul. In just a few months' time, I will turn 40, and every year has been a milestone for me. But what has pushed me to do this video is that for the first time, a month ago, my dad, 73-year-old father, said the words I've been waiting for 25 years. He said that I love you and I'm proud of you. It's quite unlikely for Indian people of this or their generation to express themselves in this way, but my amazing, wonderful father, he did. Going forward, my mom, dad, husband, mother-in-law, father-in-law, and children are part of the healing of many rape victims because they have helped me defeat the stigma and disgust connected to rape victims. I am now a certified rape counselor and have been awarded an accreditation and a bursary to study towards a bachelor's degree in psychology. And I will begin this journey next year as I enter the second half of my life. Finally, viewers, friends, family, colleagues, and my loyal followers, I am especially doing this video because we are reaching, or maybe we've reached already 40,000 followers on this platform. I ask you, my family and I urge you to share this video. 33% of women in South Africa have been either raped or molested or abused in some way or other, and a huge percentage of these result in suicide. When I started this journey along with my colleagues, we had 2% success rate. It's now doubled, which is not merely enough. But please understand that immediate counseling after any traumatic event like rape or abuse can and does prevent suicide and helps to mitigate the trauma that affects every facet of a victim's life. The girls and women that I counsel on a Friday often don't make it to the next appointment. And this is our reality as counselors. I urge you to please play your part in sharing my story, talking about this, but also recognizing when a woman or girl isn't all right, to take her seriously. Many of these victims are too afraid to speak out, and you can help them to open that door by looking out for the signs. Sudden withdrawal, isolation, depression, aggression, or even rebellion. All these signs were there up until I was 36 years old. I had sudden bursts of anger, frustration, crying, but in public, I would cover all this up with I like to believe, vibrant personality and sometimes comedic mentality. But at home, I was addicted to sleeping pills, painkillers, and I was surviving on antidepressants. None of these are good to use extensively, and this has left me with damaging physical effects on the lining of my stomach and gut. The takeaway from my story should be one of hope and a lesson that we can make a difference in the lives of those who may look like everything is fine, but deep down they're drowning. Trauma affects us all, and while I have the joy of a happy ending, not everyone is this lucky. For me, life will really begin at 40. But if there's one lesson that I've learned through my journey, it's that one should never or not wait for better times to decide to be happy. Right now, I'm not even halfway to where I need to be at, especially in my endeavors to raise awareness around rape and GBV and suicide. I waited too long to take the right steps. Ladies, don't do this, no matter what situations you are in. Just decide to choose joy. And by doing this, you have to choose yourself first. You cannot live your life trying to please and protect everyone around you. You have to live your own authentic self and express your own truth. If you do not do this, you will empty your very being, your soul, and trust me, you cannot serve from an empty vessel. It's an immense privilege to share this with you, my loyal followers and my supporters, especially in my trade. And I entrust my story to you with gratitude for where I am now. And always remember that the question isn't who's going to let me. It should always be who's going to stop me.